Hi everyone, welcome to Fast Forward's webcast on Dirty Rhetoric. My name is Jess Gozier, your moderator. For those of you who want to follow along on social media, you can find us using the hashtag Dirty Rhetoric or using our Twitter handle at FastForward. Now on to today's speakers. I'd like to introduce you to Gavin McMahon. Gavin is the senior partner and co-founder at Fast Forward. He's passionate about helping people around PowerPoint, presenting, communication, and message discipline on his blog, Make a Powerful Point. You can also follow him on Twitter at Powerful Point. Also presenting today is Peter Watts-Pascal. Peter is a communications coach and analyst who helps presenters around the world to take the stage by unleashing the potential power of their words. He's a contributor to the Huffington Post and hosts a weekly blog of ideas for presenters called The Presenter's Blog. You can follow him on Twitter at Speak2All. Gavin and Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks to anyone who's watching this. We appreciate you taking a look. We're going to talk today about an old subject from a fresh perspective. We're not talking about politics so much, but around rhetoric. And hopefully we're going to unpack a little what rhetoric really is and how it can help you. Most people think about rhetoric and they see it as a little bit of a dirty word, something they really do associate with politicians. So we're going to take a look at somebody who's, I guess, trying out as a politician right now and see how he uses rhetoric. And then we're going to ask the question, how can that really help you? If you think about rhetoric, it's been around for a very long time, but it's something when you really start to pay attention that you see all around you. And the question for you, if you're a writer, can it make your copy really sing? Can it make your copy rise above the noise? If you're someone that is working maybe in digital media or working in content marketing, can rhetoric for you increase the chances of a click? If you're speaking, if you're an executive or a presenter of some kind, can rhetoric win over your audience? And can rhetoric sell your screenplay? Maybe you've got ambitions to write a novel or write a movie. Can it help you sell what you're doing? And for educators, can it help you spice up that debate? Can it help in the classroom? Well, the answer to all those things is yes, we think it can. We think that a lot of the time people don't do it and don't embrace it because it's hard. So what we've done and why we're calling this dirty rhetoric is because we've tried to take the idea of rhetoric, the classical idea, and make it quick and dirty just for you.
Now, thanks, Gavin. As we look at Donald Trump, what can we say about the Donald? Someone who already had tremendous name recognition out there, very successful businessman, but in politics, fairly unknown. And I hope I'm not offending anyone when we say that, well, when he first got into the Republican race, I think a lot of people were looking at him as the gag candidate, the joker in the pack who wouldn't go very far, certainly as other fellow candidates were. But where are we today? He's the front runner. He has been climbing through those polls. Now, why is that? Could it be that maybe he's using some rhetoric in there? Mr. Trump himself firmly denies it. In fact, in a lot of his sessions, he goes out of his way to deny it. However, there is definitely something driving that momentum. And, well, we've got a hunch it could just be rhetoric. So maybe we've got here a classic example of how rhetoric works best with very plain speech.
And what Donald Trump is, and even I think his friends or enemies would admit it, is he's a brilliant promoter. So the question is, how do you take those rhetorical skills and rhetorical techniques that he's using and make them work for you? Can dirty rhetoric help you in your job? If you communicate for a living, and let's face it, I think most people do, can upping your game there, can taking a few lessons from the Donald help you do what you do? We think it can.
But before we deep dive into the Donald, let's just take a very quick history of where rhetoric came from in the first place. Now, Gavin mentions that one of the goals, one of the good things of rhetoric is it can help your message to rise above the noise. And we all know that in today's multi-channel, internet-enabled, cable-visioned world, there's a lot of noise to rise above. Rhetoric can help us because that's where rhetoric came from. If we go back 2,500 years to the ancient Greek agora and the Roman forum, they were incredibly noisy places. Imagine huge crowds of orators and debaters and sellers all yelling at the top of their voices to try and attract an audience. There was a problem. There was too much noise. And so the great minds of the time realized that certain speech patterns could actually attract the attention of an audience. And they developed and codified different word combinations that might give you scale or argument or make you memorable. And they worked. They were tried and tested and proven. But then, over the following 2,000 years, they all got a little bit muddled and they became complex and they became the property of a very educated elite, an elite of philosophy grads and classics grads, and of course, presidential and political speechwriters. But now's a time that we need them back more than ever. And that's what dirty rhetoric is designed to do. Those old skills brought back, quick and dirty.
So we're going to use these cards that we've designed. And what we've done is we've essentially taken 50-something rhetorical techniques that are tried and true, and we've simplified them for you. We've given them simple English names like the stick or last word repeat. We've categorized them according to the type of trick they can perform for you. We've given you simple examples and a very simple visual and a very simple definition of what they are, so that they become much easier to use. So we're going to use these dirty rhetoric cards to take a look at one of Donald's recent speeches.
Now, as we were saying, Mr. Trump tells us he's very, very plain spoken. So we did some analysis of a couple of different Trump stump speeches. That's actually quite hard to say, a Trump stump speech. And we got surprised. They are full of rhetorical structures. They're plain spoken, yes, but full of rhetoric. This speech, for example, which was given to the Heritage Foundation, has no less than 39 different rhetorical structures contained within it. That's 39 discrete structures. Now, something else that Trump does as a speaker is he tends to repeat these. So even though we've only got 39 discrete structures, within a 10-minute speech, there were hundreds of different instances of rhetoric.
So we've taken a couple of simple examples, and we're going to just dissect them for you and show you how these rhetorical techniques that Peter talked about actually work. First I'll read this sentence. Now we have to build a fence, and it's got to be a beauty. Who can build better than Trump? I build, it's what I do. I build nice fences, but I build great buildings. Fences are easy, believe me. I apologize, by the way, for my terrible Trump accent.
Actually, Gavin, that was quite spooky. I did think I was in the room with him for a moment there. Now,
so let's look at the first one.
Okay, thank you. Now, Donald Trump, first let me just say, this passage has appeared in several Donald speeches. And it's because one of his claims to election is he's going to be very tough on immigration. And he's going to achieve that by sticking a phenomenal fence across the frontier. So this can't just be any old fence. He wants the audience to actually visualize it, to see it, to savor it. He's adding a little bit of spice to the sentence. And he does that, well, you spice things with seasoning. This is no ordinary fence. This has got to be a beauty.
So I want to bring your attention to this, because so often when we're mired in the world of work, we tend to just resort to the technical descriptions that we use and the language of our industry. And we forget that we're speaking to human beings, and that's what rhetoric is all about. How do you convince and persuade human beings to listen to you, to pay attention to you, to do what you need them to do? Well, this is where this rhetoric works. Look at the emotion of that word beauty. There's a great example on the card to the right. If you look at seasoning, there's a Steve Jobs example, and he was a master of this. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. Now, pre-Steve Jobs, I don't think anyone would have associated the words beautiful and typography together. But as you do that, you begin to shape meaning, you begin to engage people, because you're using this verbal seasoning that really helps. So let's take a look at the next example that's in this short paragraph.
Now, who can build better than Trump? I build. It's what I do. This is something called my experience. It's a proof statement. Trump is starting to move towards making a logical, persuasive case. Now, as the best of scientists and trial lawyers will tell you, if you're going to argue a case, you've got to have evidence. You've got to have some proof to back it up. And there's multiple different ways in which, within rhetoric, we can achieve a proof statement. My experience is one of Trump's favorites. It appears a lot. He's always quoting things he's done or people he's spoken to. And after all, what's he known for? The Trump name is synonymous with the Trump Tower, and it's a spectacularly large building.
Now you'll notice if you look at the card on the right, we've not completely gone away from the Latin name. If you are a classic scholar, you can look up, and it's written upside down on the card in the bottom right corner, martyria. That's actually the classical root of this rhetorical technique. It's about supporting your case by referring to your own experiences, as Peter said. And you do it really, it's a very, very powerful technique, especially when presenting, to figure out how to bring your own credibility into the room, because people will pay attention to you if they believe you are a credible speaker on the subject, if you're a credible writer on the subject. So how do you bring that into it in a way that works for you? So let's take a look at the next one. This is one of my favorites, I think. And it's probably, when people think about rhetoric, one of the most recognizable pieces of rhetoric. Look at the lines of word. It's I build, it's what I do, I build nice fences, but I build. So you've got this repetition going on, which I think people will associate a lot with rhetorical techniques. But here particularly, you've got this last word, first word combination with I build nice fences. Now, your English school teacher probably told you that you should not write, if you've used a word in a sentence, don't repeat it too often. And that's generally a good rule of thumb for writing. You don't want to say, and this, and that, and that, and that. And is one of those words that you probably don't want to repeat. But if you use the rhetorical techniques correctly, and if you begin to learn these and use them well, you will find that there is a time when you do want to repeat words, and using something like a last word, first word structure has a ring to it. It makes it pleasant to the ear. It makes it very memorable. A great example, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. It's this last word, first word repetition that's going on.
Ah, Yoda, one of the great figures of rhetoric. Gavin's absolutely right. English teachers would have told us not to use that structure because repetition is frowned upon. But within rhetoric, repetition was always one of the key ways to make something memorable, to really hammer something home. And this links into one of my favorite definitions of what rhetoric is. In that rhetoric or rhetorical structures are something that deviate from common usage or commonly accepted usage of language. And they deviate not so much that people think, hey, wow, that person just really messed up their sentence, but they deviate just enough to trigger the attention, to make something lock into the brain. So hence, one of the several repetition structures. Now here, with the last word, first word, it's memorable, yes, and it sounds eye-catching, if that's not to mix my senses up too much. But also it's serving a logic function, because we saw earlier the evidence of who can build better than Trump. I build, it's what I do. That's his evidence statement. Now he's starting to move into an argument, and he wants to link the argument to the evidence. So hence, finishing one sentence with 2 words and starting the next sentence with the same 2 words. So in the mind of the audience, it's locking those 2 things together. Now, the card has gone orange. Oh, we've got small to big next because we're moving on to I build nice fences, but I build great buildings. Right, we are really cranking up towards the main argument here. And Donald Trump wants the audience to be impressed by the argument. He wants them to see him as the strongest builder ever. He wants the achievement of building Trump Tower to seem so much more dramatic than building a fence. So let's just drop back to your old English teacher again. And what did your English teacher tell you about the word nice. I can remember what mine taught me, that nice was a word never to be used because it's a small word, it's a weak word, it's a tiny little word. When it's put beside great buildings, nice fences suddenly seem almost insignificant.
Make it seem easy. And that's what this does. You know, if you notice as we've gone through some of the cards, the color has changed on the cards. What we've done is we've assembled these rhetorical techniques. We've really looked at the categories of persuasion that you're trying to go through. So the blue cards, for instance, are about making things seem very vivid. The orange cards that you see here are about expansion or expanding the argument and getting there. So let's look at the next one. Fences are easy, believe me. That's his final statement in this little paragraph. And what he's really saying after this whole argument to get there, he's making a statement that argues from a position of strength. You see this an awful lot in advertising all over the place. By making that comparison in the earlier statement, it must be really hard to build a skyscraper in the middle of New York, so a fence can be easy. He's able to say this line, fences are easy, believe me. He's established credibility by saying who can build better than Trump. He's caught your attention by saying the fence is going to be a beauty and using a really vivid description. And now he's arguing from this position of strength that says fences are really easy, believe me.
Absolutely. It's almost the same artist as great cinematography. There should be an Oscar for some of these lines, because you can imagine the different lenses that allow some things to appear small, other things to appear great. We've probably all seen the sort of photographs where a small child appears to be bigger than the Statue of Liberty, and it's simply a matter of perspective of where things have been placed. And with that scale structure we saw with the orange card before the current one, when that's combined with the sentence, fences are easy, believe me, if I can do that, I can do this, to the audience listening in that moment, in their minds, they're actually seeing it. And it's all coming true for them.
So let's look at the last sentence, where it's a different paragraph, but from later in the same speech, and he's making this another argument, obviously to make his case. And I'll read it, and I'll let Peter talk about how this equation works. You need somebody, because politicians are all talk and no action. Nothing's going to get done. They will not bring us, believe me, to the promised land.
This is a logical argument that works just like algebra. It's also known as an enthymeme, and a lot of advertising actually relies on a similar structure. Let's take it apart a bit. But first, I want to test Gavin's maths. Gavin, if I was to say to you 2 plus 3, you would say back to me?
Mostly I would say 5.
Perfect. Yeah, the maths is working today. This is a good thing. Because if I had just told Gavin that, well, 2 plus 3 is 5, I would be insulting his intelligence. Leaving the audience to work out the missing element actually flatters their intelligence. It says, hey, I trust you, audience, to come to the right conclusion. And that's what Trump's doing here. There's a couple of elements to the sentence. You need somebody, that's one element. Because politicians are all talk and no action. That's the second element. All right, so if we've got first element, you need someone. Second element, it can't be a politician. They're all talk and no action. Logical conclusion, you need a business person. You need Trump. So he's taken the audience with him on that journey, and this audience, it must be said, there's something else that he's very good at doing. A close reading of the audience, a close understanding of who he's talking to, and then using their own belief set to form these arguments.
What you'll notice in some of these formula, and this is a classic example of it, is that you really are, you're not just imparting a monologue. Because you're leaving something to the imagination, this filling in the blank of, well, if a politician can't do it, then somebody else must, and it must be a businessman in this case, you getting the audience to do a little bit of work. And that, in this case, is a good thing because it makes them believe more what you're saying, because it's their, aha, I have the answer, that gets them to believe that this is a true statement.
Absolutely. And that links them in because people are more inclined to believe their own logic than anybody else's. So great, let the audience form their own logic. Now, I'm just looking at the card, Gavin, and isn't this the one with your favourite
Yeah,
phrase?
so Peter and I had a tremendous fun not only making these, but looking for and looking at tons of examples. And we've got examples from advertising and books and political speeches and all sorts of famous lines. But this is probably my all-time favorite line from any movie. I've come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. It's a great example of algebra. It's probably a movie you've never seen. It's a very cult movie, but it's that way of engaging the audience. It's the same example with Trump with the Promised Land. It gets you to think a little bit, and when you think, you get the joke. It's fun, it's creative, it's engaging, and that's what rhetoric really is. It's about, it's the art of making people sit up and pay attention. It's the art of making people dig in and lean forward into what you're saying. And unfortunately, it's something that's really, it's something that's died. And that's really why we've created Dirty Rhetoric. We really want to bring it back, but we don't necessarily want you to go and take a Latin class, and we don't necessarily think you need to take a classics course to be able to do this. Dirty Rhetoric is a project that we've now put on Kickstarter. We've had some great reception to it. We've begun to use it all over the place, as you can see with the Trump analysis, and hopefully what you've seen today is you'll begin to recognize how much great communicators use rhetorical devices. And hopefully you're now thinking, well, if I need to be a great communicator, and I'll let you fill in the blank, that's where Dirty Rhetoric comes in. You can get these very simple cards that can show you some techniques, you can learn how to use them, and you can begin to use them in your day-to-day.
And these techniques are best used individually. You don't need to use the whole deck all at once to get the full effect. Just choosing one or two of them and experimenting will lift your writing, your speaking, your selling, your marketing, your teaching, whatever communications product you are working on. And that's why we are so thrilled with some of the response that we've had since the launch of Dirty Rhetoric. For example, Michael Arad, the author of Babel No More, who had some very kind words to say about how rhetoric required a usability upgrade to bring it back. And that's what the cards are doing.
Thanks, Gavin and Peter. To find out more on Dirty Rhetoric, you can visit dirtyrhetoric.com. You can also find us on Kickstarter. We hope you'll take a look, we hope you'll pledge, and we hope you like them enough to share with your friends and colleagues. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us today.